Um, it's amazing as always. Doris's,
Tom,
yeah,
I'm sorry, can I say something? I forgot to do my usual. Can I do something?
of
Anyway,
course.
greetings from Grace Ministries, also known as Trinitarian Grace International. And today our speaker is Tom Fallon, and we're turning it over to him at this time. Tom?
Okay, thanks, Randy. Um, yeah, Doris, as always, amazing selection of songs, and actually the initial comment about the use of the imagination. Um, in my studying of how to process trauma, it's really important that we engage our imaginations, because trauma is stored in the side of the brain that's associated with the imagination. So anytime you can activate your imagination, the possibility of releasing stored emotional baggage can be released. And one of the concepts that I've been coming more familiar with is totally based on the scriptures, and that is learning to become our own loving parent. And um, a lot of us, some of us maybe, had childhoods that were less than ideal, but the concept is, and it's interesting in light of what Randy mentioned about the woman who wasn't essentially listening to her body, and got into this situation where the medical procedure had to become severe. Um, Let me just do this first. Let me just share, if I can, the screen, which, okay. Okay, I think this is it. All right. So this is the basis. Can you see that screen? Okay. So this is the basis of what I wanted to talk about today, is a few of Jesus's words, which are really amazing, um, in because of the dramatic nature of the words. Really, to me, Jesus said, "Let the children come to me; don't stop them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who are like these children." So again, in light of being reflective and thoughtful, it's worth thinking about what are the characteristics of a little child. And so Jesus is advocating that we exemplify, or we live these characteristics, because such are those that enter the kingdom of heaven, or those that exhibit childlike qualities. And I'm just going to bang through these and then go back to just reflecting. But anyone who welcomes a little child like this one on my behalf welcomes me, and anyone who welcomes me welcomes not only me, but also my Father who sent me. And George MacDonald had written an amazing unspoken sermon, he said, based on this scripture. And what he's saying essentially is that, for George MacDonald at least, the key characteristic of, and he made a point of, this child, let this child come on to me. And what he was pointing out was that this child had such a faith-filled relationship with his father, that he had so much total trust in his father, and that's what made this dynamic of, if you welcome this child, you're welcoming me, Jesus, and you're welcoming the Father. You're bringing, because the three are one, that they are so together in total faith and confidence in one another, that that there's no separation, there's no difference. um I think this is a key point. there's a theme Ronnie and I were talking about yesterday when he was visiting a place for a little while, that one of the methods that they used in their therapeutic community was having people redo some traumatic events in which they were involved in, and reimagine these events in a different way, so that there's the theme of arrested development. If there's also the understanding that there's certain developmental needs that have to be met for a child to grow up and to be fully functional in this world. And if those needs are not met at those areas of development, they're frozen at that point. In other words, if somebody, and I forgot the exact way, but Erickson was the psychologist that I think came up with this initially. But if a child is growing up in a very disruptive, hostile, violent environment very early, they learn not to trust the world. They learn to live in total fear. They learn that the outside world is a scary place, and they have to protect themselves from things that are not actually threats. But what happens neurologically is that the brain becomes triggered, and what is the section of the brain called the amygdala gets over enlarged. And what happens is that you start perceiving things as threats that are not actually threats. And the way to repair that rupture, that condition, is to go back and this has happened for me in what's called people call it different things, but Larry Hinkle's group calls it inner healing prayer, transformational prayer. But you basically you find yourself you create what is called a safe place in a meditative state. You just imagine the safest place or the most beautiful place that you've ever been, and you again, to activate the imagination, you start feeling the sun, or whatever, the air on your arms. You feel the breeze, you smell the smells of whatever area you've chosen, and whether it be the forest or the ocean. But or maybe it's a beautiful family gathering with the smells of food or whatnot. But regardless, you activate your imagination, and it's all done in a group of 3 people: you, the person that's being prayed over, a person that is just watching you and praying for you, and then there's a kind of a guide that kind of directs your imagination during this thing. And this can work over Zoom, by the way, so happy to do this for anybody that feels led to maybe want to try this. But it's a really beautiful practice. So you get into this meditative state, and then you invite Jesus to come. And again, there's no pressure, or there's no duress. If he comes, he comes. If he doesn't come, he doesn't come. But most generally something occurs, but again, no pressure in this regard. But for me, what's happened is, Jesus comes, or in one case, there was an experience like what Mary said, well, what the angel said to Mary, where she was told that, when she asked, how can I become pregnant, because I haven't known a man, the angel said the spirit will overshadow you. And in this case, I was completely overshadowed, and like my whole visual field went dark. Not a bad darkness, but then I was taken into these different situations that had happened during my early teenage years, where some pretty traumatic things had happened. And I revisited, not intentionally, but I revisited these places. And it was amazing that while these they were basically, I got beat up a lot when I was a kid. Our father taught us to never back down from a fight, so I never backed down from a fight, even though I was only like 105 pounds as a freshman in high school. So it normally didn't go too well for me. And but when I went to these places, I realized, kind of like Paul Young talks about in The Shack, where when Missy was killed, she didn't experience any pain, that there's a place within each of us that is a place of complete safety where the world cannot touch us. And I remember being in those places at various times in my life, and I just remember that during that experience that Jesus was telling me, I was with you here, I was with you here, I was with you in all these different situations. And it was amazing. I just started crying, and the guys I was with didn't really understand it, but I just released like years and years of just stored up trauma. And but anyhow, so that's, and the same thing happened. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. Yeah, so we have to become like little children is the last one. But I just recently had another therapy session, and what appeared to me in that therapy session was um, my little wounded self as, maybe a 2-year old, maybe even younger. But and I saw that little child that I was as that, you know, um, he had a scar over his eyes. His eye was red. I was constantly, or not constantly, but I had been taken to the hospital a bunch of times as a kid for various injuries, and I'm understanding now why that is based on what they teach about complex PTSD, that when a child is in a very uh, negative energy field, that they store a lot of energy in their bodies and they need to release it, so they become hyperactive, accident prone. I mean, this is definitely something that is known in the medical society now. It's becoming more and more mainstream to understand that there's a great deal of illnesses that are beyond a doubt related to psychological wounding. And so, again, to welcome the little child to as we become our own loving parent, which is to become Christ-like to our own child, that wounded child within us, that the healing can occur for some of these physical ailments that we suffer from. Um, the It's interesting too in understanding. There was a couple things that came to me during Holy Week, and one of them was that it, obviously we all know the words of Jesus from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? And Baxter Kruger and others teach really well on that Jesus is obviously quoting Psalm 22, and with the strength that he had at that point, that was what he could, utter, but he was going to chant through the rest of that psalm, which turns into a victory march. But at that point, what he was feeling is complete abandonment by God, which I don't know this for sure, but I suspect that every human being on this planet has at one time or another felt completely abandoned by God. And so Jesus was entering into that sense of abandonment I know that I have experienced. And I wonder, if this is some common experience for the human race. I think it is, but I'm not sure. I know it certainly is for people that, end up in prison and in drug rehabs and things like that, that that there's a sense of isolation and separation from God and from others. And it's interesting too, because the single most traumatic trauma wound is actually, according to the experts, neglect or abandonment. Um, so it's obvious that this word salvation, or to become whole, or to become healed, requires that we become a whole person, a whole integrated person. All our parts are dissociated parts. A human being dissociates when the pain of an event becomes so great that they psychologically can't handle it, so they dissociate. Um, but there's a famous story that I might have told here before, but it's of a Cherokee Indian, that I think it's a Cherokee, but they were the code talkers during World War II. And he had become friends with a German during when he was a merchant marine. And prior to World War II, these two guys were real big buddies and whatnot. And then the war broke out, and the Cherokee, or I forgot, I think it's Cherokee, maybe Navajo, but he was the code talker, and he was captured by the Nazis, and they tortured him for endless months to have him release, the code, and he would not do it. And they would nail his feet to the floor. They would just torture him in all these different ways, but he would never give up the code. And finally, they were going to execute him, in the gas chamber, and lo and behold, who's behind him but his old buddy from the Merchant Marines. And they're about to put him in the gas chamber, and this man, his old friend, saves him from the gas chamber. The Americans come shortly thereafter and free the concentration camp. And so the man became a complete paraplegic as a result of this situation, and an alcoholic. So he goes back to his tribe to die, and his tribe, the elders of his tribe, got him together, and they knew that he had to call back his soul. So he had to do basically soul retrieval and their prescribed method of doing this was to take him. It was in the middle of the winter, and as a paraplegic, they threw him into this ice cold lake. And when he went into the lake, his will to live came back, and he called back his spirit into his body, and he was released from his alcoholism and his paraplegic condition, and he became a very famous recovery speaker. But I guess I see a similarity between this and these verses of Jesus, of letting the child, come to me, come to us, reintegrating that childhood part of ourselves. And so I was thinking, what are the characteristics of this child that Jesus is asking us to mimic, or to exemplify? You know, like George MacDonald said, total trust and confidence in the Father. So I guess I'm advocating for myself, and I wrote this for myself to help myself do this better. Is we know, based on Trinitarian theology, that which, by the way, this is Trinity Sunday in the liturgical year. We know that Christ is seated at the right hand of the Father, fully human, fully divine right now, which means humankind is also seated at the right hand of the Father, but that we welcome this child in us into this union, that we check in on this child. The child, I believe, is very sensitive to his conditions. The child, in my opinion, has just come from God. The child, when it's newly born into the world, is just full of wide-eyed wonderment and enthusiasm and joy, and just learning things every day and exploring every day, and the whole world is just completely new and exciting. I think this is why that Jesus is saying that we have to turn and become like little children, is because that the child isn't carrying at that point in his life the scar tissue, because there is no scar tissue. It's the child is it's a complete blank slate. It's just come from love, and it is love. It's full of love. The I think another thing that Emmett Fox talks about with the child too is that, and this is something I definitely have to learn. If the child is in the crib or whatever, and the parent put the diaper pin in, and the diaper pin is stabbing the baby in the rear end, the baby doesn't say to itself, "Must be the will of God that I suffer." The baby lets the parent know that it is suffering. It tells, we all know this, the baby will tell you that it's suffering. And I think a lot of problems that I've had in my life come from not saying in a calm and gentle way that what is happening here is unacceptable, that I need to learn to love myself and to stand up for myself. One thing that we learn from living in dysfunctional families is that what you think, what you feel, what you say does not matter. So you learn to just stuff all your feelings, all your emotions, and you become somebody that is a people pleaser. You're there to keep your caretaker happy, and you learn to put the focus on others instead of yourself. And that has clearly been something that I know that I need to learn how to do, is to actually love myself, to listen to myself, to respond to situations that I know that are not honoring myself. So, you know, this might sound weird. It sounded weird to me in the beginning. But to really picture yourself as that little one, and to it's a it's in the psychological fields these days. They call it IFS, internal family systems, where they are looking at all these developmental stages and checking in. I think in internal family systems, they talk about, and I think we can all relate to this, that we all have what is called an inner critical parent. I think nobody would say, I don't have that. We all have a voice in our head that's constantly telling us we're screwing up, I believe. I know I do. And so that's called the inner critical parent. We are trying to develop what is called the loving parent, which I would say is, Christ essence, total love, you know, but then we also have other frozen parts within us, maybe frozen or maybe overactive parts in us, like the child, the baby, the infant, the the teenager. The teenager, as you know, is usually very rebellious and very outspoken and things like that. But there's a good energy that child is the teenager is responding and protecting the little child. The whole foundation is based on those initial conditions that we all grew up in. And if the initial conditions, and again, I might be just speaking to only myself in this case, but if those initial conditions are not proper, then the entire foundation is not good. So unless that I go back and start talking to and nurturing and allowing that child to feel safe in this world, and coaching that child as a father would, you know, that the world is safe, that I'm there for you. And this is the exact relationship that Jesus had with his Father, that Jesus was in this. There's no other way that he went through what he went through without having a complete communication with his Father, where he was receiving words of affirmation. I remember the story of the great Walensky, I think his name was the tightrope walker that walked over the Grand Canyon without any tethers. And when he did that, and he did that to demonstrate the power of God, he did it with the balancing pole. But the whole time he was doing it, he had a Bluetooth on, and his Father was talking to him throughout the whole event. And it was so cool. I recommend, you know, downloading or watching that on YouTube. But the Father the whole time was saying to the Son, Son, you look marvelous. You are wonderful. You are incredible. Every step you take is like artwork. Everything, I love everything you're doing. So that was the communication he was hearing. He walked across the entire Great Grand Canyon with winds and with storms and everything else, without the rope that if he fell he was going to die. But he just had the bar and his Father in his ear telling him he was beautiful, he was marvelous, he was amazing. Even in the Old Testament, Isaiah saw that in that day the wolf and the lamb will live together, the leopard will lie down and with the baby goat, the calf and the yearling will be safe with the lion, and the little child will lead them all. Can you imagine if every world leader in this day and age was, and Jesus said a lot of these things as the disciples were, the previous verses that I was just sharing, he said a lot of these things in response to that the disciples were acting like most humans do. Who's going to be the greatest? Who's going to be the leader? Who's going to be in charge? All this utter nonsense. Whereas if you look at little and they just get along. They don't care black, white, they don't care Chinese, they don't care male, female. They are just playing, and they're just having fun, and they're, you know, you know, if somebody's acting unjustly, they're gonna let them know, but they're just playing, and they're easily corrected, they're easily brought back to love, you know. So again, the little child will lead them. Imagine a world in which every leader was resonating with that childlike atmosphere, that attitude, that love, that kindness, that generosity, that open-mindedness, that it's a mystical state. And that's why teachers like Carl Jung and Emmett Fox called this little child who's in us the wonder child. And that's based on, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. The running of our lives, the government, the ruling of our lives can be put and placed upon the instincts and the intuitions coming from the little child. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So I believe that is our connection to a realm of understanding and insight and guidance that we all have. But it takes a development. It takes a practice to, and Jesus is telling us straight up, unless you become like a little child, unless you turn, which other verses are calling it repent, and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom, which I think is really harsh for Jesus, but he's being pretty direct, and I think that's a pretty direct statement. You know, C.S. Lewis talks about this, and I'll close with this, that his picture of heaven is you wouldn't want to be in heaven unless you were the little child. There's no part of you, if you were still living in your worldly conditions of, you know, selfishness, greed, self-centeredness, driving and striving, and you're trying to rule other people, heaven has no appeal to you, because in C.S. Lewis's picture of heaven, it's beautiful. It's in The Great Divorce. He shows this picture of heaven as this place where there's no selling, there's just giving. And he shows this as like there's a ball that's moving joyfully from one person to the other, and they're just playing, giving, giving, giving. And then one person in heaven has a thought of taking the ball or the item for themselves, and immediately all of heaven shuts down, and everybody gets on their knees and prays for the person that had a selfish thought. And then the person is released because they realize the joy is in giving. The joy is in being open like the little child. So anyhow, that's what I got, and I'll end with that.